Hello everyone, I'm Luke Flywalker and this is SL Aviation Magazine issue 45. I have a great show lined up for you today. We will be visiting Waddon Aerodrome and taking a grid flight on Royal Vintage Airways with owner and operator Chris Winterhawk. After that, we have a special segment for you from Quinn Avery entitled Search and Rescue. Time's wasting, so let's get up in the air and get at it. I had the opportunity to visit the newly rebuilt Waddon Aerodrome the other day and spoke with owner and operator Chris Winterhawk. He has an awesome airfield and had some very expert builders help him with this project, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. So please enjoy our trip to Waddon Aerodrome. I had the awesome privilege of visiting Waddon Aerodrome, formerly Bentwaters Field, and visiting with owner and operator Chris Winterhawk. I asked Chris about the rebuild of an already successful airport and why did he do it, and here's what he had to say. Feedback from a lot of aviators who liked what we did at Onakikaloa and Surrington. There was a general complaint that there was not many airfields that cater specifically to vintage aviation theme, and while all fields are usable, there is a different atmosphere at a field that you don't have to share with modern commercial planes. I just listen to my customers and visitors.
80, 70, 60.
I asked Chris why he decided on the vintage theme when most airports are catering to modern aircraft and jets to keep their numbers up. I asked him, are you concerned specifically about traffic numbers? And here's what Chris had to say. The vintage theme is all about reenacting the adventure that aviation was during the early years, when being a passenger was not about being crammed into a metal tube and hurled through high atmosphere like a piece of baggage. Early aviation was an adventure, and the vintage theme is all about trying to recreate that adventure. I remember when I was a kid flying from Waddon Aerodrome to Amsterdam in an Elizabethan. It was an adventure. We were walked across the ground in columns of twos, led by a stewardess. You could smell the fuel and hot oil, and you could see the flames from the exhaust. It's not like today. Today you are processed like cattle into what is little better than a metal tube with a fancy seat. Instead of looking at the world traveling slowly by a few thousand feet below, the Elizabethan wasn't pressurized. Now we have in-flight movies and all the personal touches are gone. I am not concerned about traffic or numbers. People are already flying in and out on a regular basis. They like the thought of not having to share a field with modern jet aircraft, and we can turn back the clock here and give people a little taste of what things were like when flying was still new. Chris tells us that the build here was very, very loosely modeled after Corydon Airfield in England, which was originally called Waddon Aerodrome. He said, we just decided to take some of the bits we really liked from a lot of vintage airfields and come up with something that had a really good vintage feel to it. Chris says he's very fortunate to have some very talented builders work with him on this project. Sweet Cha-Cha-Chi and Raul Kowalski were on the build team. They are, in my opinion, two of the three most talented and creative builders I have come across. Along with Abby Crocus, who created Onakikaloa for me, they used their creative talents to build a fantastic field with an authentic feel. And I will have to say that this airfield has an awesome feel to it, and it's just the little touches, the very subtle nuances that they put in this build that really make you feel like you're in a real vintage airfield from the 40s and 50s. Chris also operates a vintage airlines out of Waddon Aerodrome. Here's what he had to say about that. Royal Vintage Airways is an airline dedicated to recreating the adventures of 30s aviation. We use only 3 aircraft, the Lockheed Electra, the Lockheed Vega, and Kelly Shergood's vintage Brantley 305, which, although is a 50s aircraft, fits in nicely with the theme and looks the part. We are still in the formation phase, but pilots and attendants will be trying to do things in the old-fashioned manner and giving the traveler a bit of an adventure, complete with grumpy customs officials. I asked Chris what rules he had in place to ensure that his fields remain vintage and how he planned to enforce them. Here's what he had to say. Waddon is a no-jet field. Visitors to the field who fly in on jets will be politely asked to de-res them until it's time for them to fly out again. Commercial jets will be turned away, and airlines operating from the field are aware of the policy. The field isn't equipped to handle modern jet passenger aircraft, and anyone who habitually tries to bring modern large jet aircraft onto the field will be politely asked to remove them and warned not to bring them back. There are enough modern fields to cater to the jet jockeys, and this field is not aimed at that demographic. Chris operates 2 other vintage aircraft airfields, and here's what he had to say about them. Onakikaloa is a field themed around an old Pacific military base that has been returned to civilian use. It has been specifically designed to limit the size and type of aircraft that can use it, and we discourage jets and modern aircraft from landing there. Surrington Aerodrome is a small grass field based around the British vintage era. Again, it's not large enough to take big aircraft, and it also is a no-jet field. Vintage aviation is encouraged, but we allow modern small non-jet aircraft to use it. I asked Chris one final question to say anything he wanted about vintage aircraft, flying, or SL aviation in general, and here's what he had to say. Some people are saying SL aviation is going through a rough patch at the moment. I'm not sure I agree. However, all the controversy about stolen mesh and planes that may or may not be what they seem to be is doing nothing but damaging the community as a whole and setting people against each other. I think that we should all take a step back from this. This is a legal issue, and a lot of people are getting involved in it on both sides and making their opinions known. Let's just enjoy the planes we have and the flying we have here and leave the legal authorities to sort the mess out. I see more of the airlines starting to use older aircraft, and I think that the vintage aviation scene is getting bigger, and I will be steadily promoting that theme. There is another vintage airfield planned for later in the year also. Well, Chris, we really enjoyed our visit here, and now we're going to take a flight on Royal Vintage Airways, so please enjoy the scenery and the music.
Search and Rescue by Quinn Avery. March 10th. It was just another glorious sunny afternoon in Second Life. The weather was fair and the wind was about 5 to 10 knots out of the east. It was a perfect day to sniff all the flowers and go flying. Quinn just happened to be home in his hangar, tinkering with rebuilding a gem of a little carburetor he'd picked up in the airplane scrapyard on Fiji. He was having a cup of coffee and cleaning up when out of the blue he gets a phone call that turned out to be an emergency. His friend Carly had a very concerned tone, and the first thing she said was she really needed his help. She said she just happened to be in the airport office when she heard a mayday crackle across the uncontrolled Yeager Field Airport ground control frequency about 7 minutes ago. She repeated what she heard: "Mayday, mayday, mayday, out of fuel, going down." But when she keyed the mic to acknowledge the transmission and tried to get coordinates, there was no response, and she had no idea where the plane might be. It is even possible the plane is not even in the general area at all. She went on to say she'd called 2 other private pilots at their homes to come assist in the search, and they have agreed, but acknowledged it would require some time to travel in order to get to the hangar. Quinn was a 3rd pilot she'd called. Of course, Quinn agrees to participate in the search and reassures her he will be in the air in just a few minutes. When Quinn hangs up the phone, he walks over and uses the hand cleaner on the wall to remove the grunge from his paws, then searches around for a rag to wipe them off. Pondering the situation, he picks up his coffee and walks over to the other wall where the local sectional map is mounted, and tries to figure out where the downed plane might be. His first thought is to search along the low-lying areas of the local vicinity, but he suspects this will be also the most likely place the other 2 pilots might start searching. This raises a concern that if they are all flying around in the same general location, all at the same time, we may even be putting ourselves in danger, especially if we happen to be flying in opposite directions head-on. Due to the fact that we do not have radio communications at this time, there is no way to coordinate a search, and in a rescue situation, minutes count. So Quinn just makes a decision to start searching over the Corsica Mountains. This may be the last place the other 2 pilots may think to start looking, and maybe we could cover more ground in less time and meet in the middle someplace. Setting down his coffee cup, he hops into his Cronus Pit Special and checks the fuel gauge, but bypasses all of the usual pre-flight checks and just fires up his bird. As soon as the oil temperature gauge starts to move, he makes a comm check over his navcom to Carly at base station to see if the other pilots have checked in with her yet, and finds out they have not. Their status still remains unknown, and presumably they are still en route to the airport. Taxiing out of the hangar onto the runway skirting, he blows by the run-up area, and from the moment the wheels leave the ground, the search begins. For about 15 to 20 minutes, Quinn is searching the area at roughly 70 meters in a meandering switchback pattern. Quinn travels over homes, municipal roads, trees, oil derricks, and miles of foothill trails out in the open countryside, flushing the occasional jackrabbit and coyote out from their pucker bushes. We call them pucker bushes because when you run over them in a dune buggy at full speed, the car leaps into the air, clear off the ground, which makes your butt pucker. At a place in the landscape between two adjacent mountains, where the wind is channeled and compressed into a venturi, where the velocity is consistently higher there than in the surrounding wind speeds, there, on a roadway intersection of Magellan Pass and Route 11, was an upside-down wooden four-seater 1930s Type K1 Percival Vega with full. Though the damage looks minor from the air, it would be a sad ending to a marvelous airplane if he chooses not to repair her. Fortunately, the pilot was already out of the plane and standing and walking around, waving up at Quinn. Immediately, Quinn turned his plane around and waves by aileron, rocking the plane left and right. Then he turned the plane around and did it again. Even as Quinn flew past the downed plane's position, he was already on the horn back to Carly, calling off the search that the plane had been located, and Quinn made a request for emergency medical personnel to the scene. Then, on a whim, knowing that he had at least 15 to 20 minutes for emergency medical services to arrive, Quinn took it upon himself and decided to go down and see if the pilot needed further assistance. While planning his approach to land there, it became clearly apparent by watching the wind effects on the pucker bushes that the pilot had attempted to land downwind and obviously misjudged his landing distance and just ran out of roadway. Now, there wasn't much room for Quinn to land there either, but he wanted to park next to the downed plane, not clear across the far end of the road. So Quinn chose to land in a crosswind approach and rolled up to a stop 20 feet from the downed plane and shut down his Continental engine. Just as the prop kicked over for the last time, the downed pilot had walked up to Quinn's cockpit, quite a bit dazed and disoriented, and just started talking about what had happened. Quinn got out of his plane and assessed the damage. The pilot volunteered that his Lycoming engine started to sputter, and he tried to switch tanks, but found the second tank was empty as well. Between this and trying to find Yeager's frequency, calling in a mayday, and choosing a landing site, he overshot his target upwind approach. However, when he tried to turn the plane around for a second pass, the engine up and quit on him, and he had to glide to a landing downwind, which took twice as much runway as he expected. The pilot said he had successfully gotten the little plane on the ground safely, but then it hit the last perpendicular street curb edge on the very last bit of his rollout, and in a very slow motion, the plane had pitched over onto its nose and ever so gently came to rest on its. To get out of the plane, the pilot had to unbuckle his seatbelt, and he fell out of his seat about 8 inches, bumping his head in the process. But he was very grateful to still be alive. About this time, off in the distance about 2 sims, Quinn could hear the distinct high-pitched whine of a very large, powerful jet engine, and he knew the cavalry had arrived. So Quinn quickly got back in his airplane and back into the air, so he would not have to explain why he landed on a municipal street and avoid the possibility of having his plane seized by the authorities. The moment he was aloft again, he swung the plane around and rocked the wingtips over the accident site again to show the incoming search and rescue people exactly where the downed plane was. And when the emergency management team flashed their lights at Quinn in order to acknowledge that they understood, Quinn just pitched the nose up and headed off into the west. The end.